To rebuild these water pumps on these Ford tractors, which your 8N is going to be similar. This is your 53 to 64 style. There's a couple things you got to do before we can press the impeller, bearing, and seal all out. Hello, Mr. Spider. Nice to see you there while I'm sticking my hand down there. The first thing we need to do is this rear plate has 3 screws in it. And for whatever reason they're flatheads. I don't understand the point of that. So you're going to need a screwdriver and more than likely a pair of vice grips to clamp on here. I've already broke mine loose at work just because I have better tools there. So the first thing you got to do is take these 3 screws out. And surprisingly, 3 on this one came out really nice. So that's a good sign. So we take those 3 screws out, pull the plate. There's our impeller. Now what I'm going to do is when I go to press this out, since I don't have the actual adapters, because the manual tells you to pull the pulley and then just press everything out that direction, I'm going to basically push everything out this way in one swoop, fell swoop. Okay, the next thing we got to get apart, and it's hard to see it on camera, but if you look up in here, you'll see a slot cut into the pump housing. There's a metal retention ring in here that has to come out. It's actually like a snap ring, so to speak, that holds our bearing in place. We'll see if we can get with a screwdriver. If not, we may have to use some pliers. Well, it came out nice on one side, the other side's kind of locked up. And there's our clip. Hopefully that's all of it. It's kind of shaped a little weird, but I don't see any unusual snaps on it, so hopefully that's all out. If not, that's going to fight me. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is take this over to the press and find me a way to support as much of this back as I can. And I'm going to go in here and try to push out the bearing assembly. Okay, so I have this bearing race here that goes underneath the pump pretty nicely. And I have a socket that'll fit on that shaft, the bearing shaft inside of the pump. Okay. So we're going to try and press this now. And I have broken pumps in the past, usually the pulley. So getting the pulley off is by far the hardest part. So if anything's going to break, it's going to break right at the beginning. I know that doesn't sound very promising, but it is unfortunately a sad reality of this. So let's see how this one works. Okay, so see there I've made contact with it. and just go really slow. Like I say, these things are notorious for breaking doing it this way. I mean, you got to think you're pushing out the impeller, the seal, the bearing, and the bearing all out of everything at one time. Okay, so there it was releasing. So now, let's see what happened. Did anything move? Did we break anything? Pulley still spins, so that's good. Our impeller is now down from our mounting flange, which means that this assembly has now broke free. So, line our race back up. Now if you notice, this bearing, or this pulley, is now pushing down. That is normal. Okay, so now I believe I've hit the bottom. See, now it's locked up a little bit. Which, like I say, that is normal. And that is because we're pressing this pulley against this body. And I just doubled the race to try to give me some depth in my press. I just got really tight for some reason. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, so we haven't started pressing the seal just yet. And our pulley might be close to coming off now. Yeah. So, it's probably getting ready to be another loud pop. And that's going to be our pulley actually releasing. Okay, so that's as far down as I can go because I'm hitting the bottom of my press here. But now our pulley is off. You can kind of see these little rivets here that are shiny. That contacted the pump housing flange here, and that's what was actually pressing the pulley off. So there's my socket. There's our bearing, our seal, and impeller all in one. And there's our pump housing undamaged. It's a little nasty and rusty, but it's not broken. So you just have to have the right size bearings, or piece of pipe, anything to go on this bottom to try to get as much of this covered as you can. I mean, even if you take a piece of steel or something and cut out a circle, just use something that'll cover the whole bottom. And there's that groove where that clip was. This one is your weep hole. If your seal goes bad on your pump, this will start leaking coolant. And no, this is not a crack, this is paint flecking off. Same with right here. But these pieces, this piece and our pulley, are now ready to be sandblasted and primered, because we're going to paint them when it's on the engine. So that's where we're at now. And once I get these sandblasted, primered, we'll put it back together. And one note, I don't know how well this will pick up on camera, but you can see down in the pulley there's actually a step down there. That is not what you press on. You press on the center section. So this is a 1/4 inch 7/16 socket, and it was the perfect diameter to go down in there.
Okay, so I got my water pump all sandblasted, and I painted the blue already on it where it's underneath the pulley. So to start putting this thing back together, the first thing we're going to do is put our bearing in it. When you install this bearing, you notice you have a short shaft and a long shaft. The long shaft is going to be your seal and your impeller side. So when we install this, I'm going to push it in that direction. And when we push this in, we want this top of this bearing right here to be flush with this piece. Get this pressed in. Okay. So now, if you have a retaining clip, you can go ahead and stick it back in there. And just make sure everything spins nice and free. Now, this is what I consider the hardest part of this entire job. And that's putting the seal in. And the reason I say this is the hardest part of this entire job, these seals, this one's actually unitized, but you can have them where they're two pieces. But these seals are spring loaded. And if you try to push this seal in on just the outer lip, this centerpiece is going to push out and it's going to ruin this seal. If you try to push in here to press it in, you're going to push it too far and not seat, and then you're going to have a gap between your impeller and your seal. So you kind of have to press on both of these at the same time. And you can buy an install tool for these, but if you're doing just one of them, don't waste your money. Come up with something. So that's what I did here. This is actually a socket in a socket with a spacer washer. And the reason I have this, the big socket is going to press on the shoulder. The little socket is going to press on our seal surface, which I'm iffy on, but that's the way you got to do it. Which this ain't going to take a whole lot of pressure to get on anyway. And then the washer is literally just a spacer. Reason being, if I stick just the socket down in here, and I put my seal on it, I'm still mainly pressing on this. If I stick the washer in here, now I have a tiny gap in between my socket and the seal, so whenever I push on it, It's just barely going to move it. But that's not so much of a variance that I can't make it up with just pushing this on just a smidge more. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my seal and we'll double sockets and everything. I'm going to go ahead and just stick it on there and then flip it over. And we're going to push this down in until the seal is seated. And once we get it going here, then pull it back off and verify everything's going like I want. So everything looks okay. It looked pretty square. Of course, your inner socket needs to have a section here to where the shaft will go in it, so I got to keep that in mind too. And I have to be sure that it lines up and clears everything. And this seal should go on really easily. So if you feel it binding up, stop and look. Okay, mine just got hard right there. I don't know if I bottomed it out or if I bottomed a socket, but I'm going to double check everything. Okay, I can tell you I have not bottomed it. I think I might have just started to get it actually seated into the pump. That might be why it got hard to push. Okay, now right there I bottomed it out. Okay. So now my seal's fully installed. It turns. Always make sure this turns. Because if you're not turning, then you got something wrong. Okay. So now my next step is the impeller. We'll set the impeller on here. Now on the impeller, you want to line it up to be just below the surface. I think the manual calls for like 15 to 25 thousandths. Now that seal that we put in, that center section is going to move. And you want it to be able to move, that way it presses against that impeller. That's what's actually creating our seal. We're still freely moving. Look like I'm down all the way on the seal. Our impeller's flush here with the end of our shaft. We might not be down far enough. But we'll check that here in a second. But what I want to do right now is I want to do what I call a water check. I'm going to take a plug, just a plastic plug, and I'm going to plug this hose port. And I want to take this and I want to fill this full of water. Go all on top of the impeller and everything. And then I'm going to watch and see if I lose any water out of this weep hole. If I lose water out of this weep hole, my seal's either damaged from installation or not correct or fully installed or something along those lines. So hopefully I don't see any water come out of there. As you see, I have water on it. And there's nothing leaking out of my weep hole. So that seal's installed correctly. So now all I have to do now is verify my impeller depth and reinstall the pulley. Okay, so it took me a while to find my feeler gauges. I have a gap here about 19, 20-ish. So I'm good. Bearings, everything's still turned nice. It's nice and tight. So now, to install our pulley, which I should have mentioned this before I took it all apart. When we look in here in our pulley hole, shaft, mount, whatever, this shaft was not all the way flush against this inner edge here. It was down about 1/8 of an inch. So whenever I push this back on, that's where I want it to go back to. Otherwise, our belts will be misaligned. Which, in my case, I have the engines out. So I'm going to press it down to about 1/8 of an inch, and then I can verify it with my crank pulley to see how far off I am. Hopefully not too far. And when I press this back on, if I was to take and just set the pump like this and press onto it, I'm going to push this shaft out. Because this shaft is not what I'm pressing against. I'm pressing against the pump housing at that point. So I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to have something under here to press on the shaft. So yes, it makes it tedious, but it's possible. The other option is to take and press on your pulley like that. However, if you're doing that, due to the simple fact this is a thin piece of metal, I would rather have something up in here I can press against. Like maybe this will work. This may actually be what I do, so that way it's a little easier to hold that on there than that. I may end up putting actually a piece of aluminum in here, like one of these guys, to give me a better surface to press against anyway. Okay, so this aluminum disc here will actually fit down in there and catch all of those rivets. It kind of catches that socket, so we'll use this. So now, which I'm going to have to lower my press back. So let me do that real quick. This is just a diesel engine wrist pin. Okay, so my pulley, as you see, is not supported on this flange here, but instead these rivets up here. So we'll take our pump, stick it in there like so. Take our small socket, and we'll line that bearing shaft up. So this way I'm pushing on the shaft to force the shaft into the pulley. And that's what we want. Just press it a little bit. So I'm pretty sure I'm nowhere near the depth that I need. All I got left to do now is just put the gasket on here. I'll put a little bit of silicone on it, put the plate on the back, and tighten it down, and then this pump is now rebuilt.
Alright, so whenever I put these gaskets on, just like I've done on the engine itself, I put a little bit of silicone on here. And that's just to help aid it in sealing. This gasket only line up one way, so you can't mess it up. Okay. Like I said, I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone on here, just a really small amount. So set the gasket on here, and we'll put some more silicone around this side. Okay, so now we're going to stick our cover plate back on. And our 3 backing plate screws. Tighten these things up. Okay, there we go. And while I got it sitting here, I'm just going to go ahead and wipe off some of the excess silicone. Okay, so here's the next gasket, which is actually going to go here and then in between, or back onto the engine block. So I'm going to go ahead and silicone this down here, and then I'll carry this over to the motor, and we'll get it put it on the motor. So now we're ready to go stick this onto the engine. Okay, now on this engine, these 3 holes are not blind, therefore they go into the coolant passage. So you need to put some kind of a thread sealer on these bolts before you put them in, or you will have a leak. Okay, I'm going to have to take this back off, unfortunately, because my pulleys do not line up for nothing. Okay, so now that I got it lined up, at least as close as I can between this pulley and this pulley, and that's your rear pulley on the bottom down here at your crank, I'm ready to torque these bolts down, and it is 10 to 15 foot-pounds. So I'm probably just going to go on the bottom end since these are the old originals. Go about 10 foot-pounds. Okay, now we got them all torqued down. I know it sounds rough, but I noticed that whenever I started spinning this really fast and then let it set a second, it would quit. So I guess it's just a grease in the bearing. But nothing inside the pump is hitting. Everything's good. So that's how you rebuild the water pump on one of these old Ford tractors. Not a whole lot to them. Pretty simple, actually.